The freezing wind cut across the snowy fields of eastern Belgium on the morning of December 19th, 1944. Dawn had barely arrived, and the sky was still gray with low winter clouds. In the distance, the deep rumble of engines echoed across the countryside. German tank crews sat inside their steel machines, moving steadily through narrow roads and forest edges near the small town of Bastogne. To them, the American lines ahead looked weak and scattered.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
German High Command believed the moment had finally come to break through the Western Front. Their armored spearheads, including powerful Panther and Tiger tanks, were rolling forward with confidence. But hidden miles away, American tank destroyer crews were already preparing a surprise that German tankers never expected. Within minutes, shells would begin flying across distances so long that many German crews would not even see who was shooting at them. You can almost feel the cold metal inside those vehicles as the German crews leaned forward, peering through narrow vision slits. Their mission was clear. This was part of the Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Adolf Hitler had launched this massive attack on December 16, 1944. His goal was bold and risky. German armored divisions would smash through the forests of the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and capture the port of Antwerp. If they succeeded, they could split the American and British armies and force the Western Allies into a negotiated peace. For the German soldiers inside those tanks, it felt like the last great gamble of the war. But the Americans waiting ahead were not as unprepared as the Germans believed. Across the frozen hills and open farmland, American tank destroyer units were quietly positioning their vehicles in hidden firing locations. These were not ordinary tanks. They were specialized machines built for one purpose: destroying enemy armor from long distances. And on that cold December morning, they were about to prove just how deadly they could be. Among them were crews from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion and the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion. Many of these men were operating the M36 Jackson tank destroyer, a powerful vehicle armed with a 90mm gun. That gun had been designed specifically to deal with heavy German armor like the Panther and Tiger tanks. Inside one of those vehicles sat a young gunner named Corporal Robert Andrews. Like many American soldiers in the Ardennes, he had been fighting almost continuously for days. Snow covered the ground, supplies were limited, and German forces were pushing hard. But Andrews and his crew had one advantage: distance. Their commanders had carefully chosen firing positions along ridges and open fields where they could see German armor moving far away. These locations allowed them to fire from extreme ranges, in some cases more than 2 miles. For tank warfare in World War II, that kind of distance was unusual. Most tank battles happened within a few hundred yards. Even experienced German tank crews were not used to being targeted from such long range. As the morning fog slowly lifted, American observers began spotting movement along the road networks south of Bastogne. Through binoculars and rangefinders, they could see dark shapes rolling through the snow. Panthers from the German 2nd Panzer Division were advancing, supported by armored infantry and artillery. The American observers quickly relayed the coordinates back to the tank destroyers waiting behind the lines. Inside Corporal Andrews' M36, the crew worked quickly. The commander studied the map while the gunner adjusted the sights. The loader lifted a heavy 90mm shell and slid it into the breech. The gun was pointed toward a distant ridge nearly 2 miles away. Through the telescopic sight, Andrews could just make out the outline of a German Panther tank moving slowly along the road. At that distance, the target looked small and faint. But the powerful optics of the M36 allowed trained gunners to aim with surprising accuracy. The commander gave the order. Fire. The tank destroyer rocked violently as the massive gun thundered. A bright flash burst from the muzzle, and the shell screamed across the frozen valley. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, far in the distance, a sudden explosion erupted near the lead Panther. Inside the German tank column, confusion spread quickly. Many crews assumed they were under artillery fire. The explosion had come from so far away that they could not immediately identify the source. Another American tank destroyer fired, then another. Within minutes, shells began landing among the advancing German armor with deadly precision. One Panther burst into flames after a shell pierced its side armor. Another stopped abruptly when its turret was struck. German tank commanders scrambled to locate the enemy. But there was a problem. They could not see the American vehicles. The tank destroyers were positioned far beyond the range where most German crews expected direct fire to occur. They were hidden behind ridges, tree lines, and carefully camouflaged positions. From the German perspective, it felt like invisible guns were striking them from the horizon. This was exactly how American tank destroyer doctrine was designed to work. Earlier in the war, the United States Army had created specialized units whose job was to hunt enemy tanks. Instead of attaching anti-tank guns directly to infantry units, the Americans organized fast, mobile tank destroyer battalions that could be rushed to threatened areas. Their vehicles often had powerful guns and high mobility, allowing them to engage enemy armor before it could reach friendly forces. The M36 Jackson was one of the most important of these vehicles. Introduced in late 1944, it carried the 90mm M3 gun, capable of penetrating the thick armor of German Panthers and Tigers at long ranges. For American crews, that gun was a lifesaver. Many earlier U.S. tanks, like the M4 Sherman, struggled against heavy German armor. But the M36 finally gave American forces a weapon that could match German firepower. And in the open terrain around Bastogne, the long-range accuracy of that gun made all the difference. As the German column continued forward, more American tank destroyers joined the fight. Observers adjusted firing coordinates while crews loaded shell after shell. The thunder of 90mm guns echoed across the winter landscape. Inside one Panther tank, commanded by Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Weber, the situation was becoming dangerous. Weber had been fighting on the Eastern Front before being transferred to the Ardennes Offensive. He was an experienced tanker who had survived dozens of battles. But this situation puzzled him. Through his periscope, he could see burning vehicles ahead. Yet he could not locate the American guns responsible. The range was simply too great. He ordered his driver to move off the road and seek cover behind a small rise in the ground. But even that was not enough. Another shell slammed into a nearby tank, sending fragments of steel flying through the air. At 2 miles away, the American gunners were still landing hits. This long-range engagement shocked many German crews. Their tanks were designed for powerful close-range combat, where thick armor and high-velocity guns gave them the advantage. But at extreme distances, the battlefield changed. Visibility became limited, identifying targets became difficult, and the Americans, using carefully selected positions and coordinated observation, were turning that distance into a weapon. You can almost imagine the tension inside those German vehicles. The sound of engines roaring, the smell of fuel and smoke, the constant fear that the next shell might strike their own tank. For the American crews, the pressure was just as intense. Inside each tank destroyer, the crew worked like a machine. The commander searched for new targets. The gunner adjusted the sight for range and wind. The loader lifted shell after shell into the breach. The driver kept the vehicle steady as the gun fired again and again. Each shot required careful calculation. At 2 miles, Even a small mistake in range estimation could send the shell far off target. But experienced gunners learned to read the battlefield. They watched the impact of previous shells, corrected their aim, and fired again. And slowly, the German advance began to slow down. Several Panthers were now burning along the road. Others were forced to halt and take cover. The surprise attack had broken the momentum of the German push. American artillery soon joined the fight, adding even more pressure. Shells from howitzers began landing among the German formations. The once confident armored column was now under heavy fire from multiple directions. Yet the battle was far from over. Throughout the Ardennes forest, similar clashes were unfolding. Units of the U.S. 10th Armored Division and the 101st Airborne Division were fighting to hold Bastogne against overwhelming German forces. Roads were clogged with retreating vehicles, wounded soldiers, and columns of reinforcements trying to reach the front. Snowstorms swept across the region, making visibility poor and turning the narrow forest roads into icy traps. German commanders believed speed was their greatest weapon. Their plan depended on armored units moving quickly through weak points in the American lines. But every destroyed tank and every delayed column slowed the entire offensive. This moment was just one small part of the larger Battle of the Bulge, but it showed something important. German armored forces, once feared across Europe, were no longer unstoppable. American crews had learned how to fight them. They had developed better tactics, better weapons, and better coordination between infantry, artillery, and tank destroyers. And on that cold December morning, those lessons were paying off. The design of the M36 Jackson itself reflected these lessons. Built on the chassis of the M10 tank destroyer, it carried an open-topped turret that allowed the crew better visibility. While this design exposed the crew to weather and shrapnel, it gave commanders a clear view of the battlefield. In long-range engagements like the one outside Bastogne, that visibility could mean the difference between hitting a target and missing entirely. The 90mm gun was the true heart of the vehicle. Firing armor-piercing rounds at high velocity, it could punch through the sloped armor of a Panther at ranges where German crews still believed they were safe. Back inside Corporal Andrews' M36, the crew prepared another round. The gun barrel was still warm from repeated firing. Smoke drifted across the valley, partially hiding the battlefield. Through the sight, Andrews spotted another German tank moving behind a line of trees. He adjusted the elevation slightly. The commander gave the order, "Fire." The gun roared again. Several seconds later, another explosion flashed in the distance. The target stopped moving. For a brief moment, the crew inside the tank destroyer allowed themselves a quick glance at each other. No cheering, no celebration, just a quiet understanding that their training and teamwork had just saved lives. Because every German tank destroyed at long range meant fewer enemy vehicles reaching American infantry positions. Throughout the day, similar engagements occurred across the Ardennes. American tank destroyers, and Sherman's artillery units and infantry worked together to slow the German offensive. The Germans still pushed hard, and in many places they achieved breakthroughs. But every delay mattered. Every destroyed tank weakened the momentum of the attack. As evening approached on December 19th, the winter sky darkened quickly. Fires from burning vehicles lit parts of the valley with an orange glow. Columns of smoke drifted upward into the cold air. Recovery crews began pulling damaged vehicles off the roads, while medics searched for survivors among the wreckage. For the German tankers who survived that day, the experience left a lasting impression. Many had never imagined that American vehicles could hit them from such ranges. The battlefield had changed, and the lessons of that winter fight would shape armored warfare for years to come. Because on the frozen fields of the Ardennes, 2 miles of distance was no longer safety. It had become a deadly hunting ground.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.